Let me apologize first for not speaking to you in Italian. I try, but I'm not able to do it. My wife is here, so she can help in the translation later afterwards. I do want to thank the rector, and I want to thank the staff and faculty and students at the university for inviting me here. I'm absolutely honored to be here, and I hope I'm coming back to further academic year inaugurations at the university. So it's really an honor to be here. I have some slides I want to show all of you, and I'm again honored to be here with the Archbishop and also with the Mayor, but all of you I hope will benefit or see some value in what I will show you. These slides will be available on the website for the university, so you can have them later, and that's partly because the time is limited and I'm going to have to go through them fairly quickly, which means you'll have to probably say, oh, I wish I saw that. So what I will do is try to summarize some of the ideas and some of the points that really are part of what you've already heard talked about in terms of the university and its future. Not future 20 years from now, future today and tomorrow and in the next semester, the next year. That's what's important. That's what I'm talking about today. So let me begin by being very clear that, as you can see, I have a lot of different degrees and also business experience. And I've also worked and served in government, so I know all of it. Not necessarily good, but all of it anyway. We do have our problems in the world today, and what I'm going to do is talk about and show you some examples of how I believe that your university and this region in Italy is actually at the center of innovation throughout the world, and how some ideas can help to look at that. So let me start off with the first slide. I want to be very clear about this. The world is round. There are some economists who think it's flat. No, it's round. What goes on in America, what goes on in Asia, what goes on in Europe and Africa and South America impacts all of us in terms of our climate, but also in terms of our economics and our business and our futures. So the world is round. So that's a basic premise that I will be talking about for the next few minutes. I have written a number of books about this issue. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but the latest book is highlighted there called Global Energy Innovation, and it's about how innovation throughout the world has, in the energy area, has provided us with new prospects and new ideas, and is part of what I call a green industrial revolution. That's an important concept. Not just another industrial revolution, not the past one, but a green one, based on renewable energies and technologies that I'm going to talk about in some detail. And just to give you some short, quick examples of that, because I always like to show real things rather than imaginary or pictures. This is a solar panel. You all see it lit up, the blue? That's just from the light in this room. Now look how thin it is. That's right. These are the kinds of solar panels that can be used on buildings, in our homes, on a university campus. And it's the kind of technology that exists today. And I want you to understand that, because these kinds of technologies that exist and are cost effective. They are in a way just framing the entire world and what we can do in it. And so my book talks about that, and you can see on it right in the middle of the picture, that's called a hydrogen fuel cell car. It's being made in England, and the fuel cell comes from this company. This company makes hydrogen fuel cell kits that you actually use for education, and this is the example of one of the toys and the kits. Now, I want all of you to know, I own no shares or am paid by these companies. I'm showing you what's available and what's interesting and what I think is educational for now and our future. So let's take a look at some examples of this. China. We have got to recognize that China is an important factor in the world being round. It has the distinction, and I don't think they're proud of it, but they took this distinction from we Americans. They're the #1 world's polluter in terms of carbon and our environment. America used to be that, and now we're number 2. But also China is now the number 2 economy in the world. US, China, and Japan. So we have to recognize that China is an important country, and I'm going to tell you some examples of how and why that's important. But on this chart alone, the important issue here is those red areas show the population shift from western and central China to the coastal areas. They have cities in China that have 30 million people. That's the population of the state of California, close to the population of other countries like Italy. It's big. So they have to deal with very important issues from their country, and what are they going to do about it? China has a series of 5-year plans. They're now in their 12th. In those plans, I'm not going to read all of this, they provide ideas, vision, and scope, measurable objectives, but most importantly, money. I talk about this in America, and people say, oh, 5-year plans. That's socialism. And I say, so what? I teach business classes, MBA students, on doing business plans. What's wrong with countries and cities and communities having their own plans and measurable objectives that they're making those areas and goals that they say they're going to do? One of the things that China is now doing, I just pointed this out quickly, is that to take that population growth that's going to the city, and in their current plan having people moving towards the western part of China, towards Tibet in the western Mongolian region. I mention this in part because that means a very big shift in how they're looking at the development of regions and areas throughout China. And I think those are the kinds of things that I know we're thinking about in America, where populations don't have to be all in one city or area, but in different parts. It's called sustainability. And by the way, sustainability, it means things like cities and communities, but also shopping malls, walking streets, and yes, universities. Universities are communities, as you all know from being here today. So I point this out because really one of the key factors here is these communities, or many times cities, have people who are helping to provide innovation and leadership. I put the picture here of a gentleman who just passed away, a man by the name of Steve Jobs. I think you all know who he was. He actually was here in Milan 25, 30 years ago. He actually was here for a short period of time, but among other things in his life, he saw the connection between design and architecture and technology. He saw how to make and create new products that we all are familiar with today. And I put his picture here because that's the uniqueness of this region. You have creative people who are thinking about design, architecture, and planning, and you put that together with technology, innovation, engineering, and science, and you have new products and ideas in this third or green industrial revolution. It's extremely important to keep that in mind, and I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to at least have his picture on here to remind us all of that in our future. These green communities are a variety of things. It's energy and environment, but it's also waste and water, transportation, and buildings. All of these are part of it. Not just one thing, but all of it. The sustainable communities are all over the world. You can see this is just a diagram of one of them, which has all of them, but there are also ways to have transportation between communities. I'm here with my wife and my son, and my son loves to ride on your subway, trolleys, and trains. We don't have those in Los Angeles. I'm beginning to think Los Angeles is a developing country. It is. And because of that, it's important to remember these kinds of transportation systems between these communities is critical. We also are looking at communities that used to have central power plants, and now they're becoming power available, as I already showed you, with a solar panel on top of buildings. That's also an important shift and change. It's not all coming from one area, but it's also business opportunities among and between our communities because you have solar panels on your home, on your university campuses, on your businesses. Here's some examples. I've done books about sustainable communities throughout the world. Japan, we all know what happened in Japan recently, this year. But Japan has had a history as an island nation, having to have its own energy developed and using renewable sources. This is just one city on the upper left here that you can see. I don't know, the pointer. These are all solar panels on all of these homes. The whole entire city and community was able to do a master contract to buy solar panels for the roofs of all those homes. An idea that makes economic sense and also good for our environment and provides renewable energy in this green industrial revolution. Here's a town in northern Denmark called Frederikshavn. Frederikshavn is planning to be 100% energy independent by 2015, just in time for the 2015 Expo. And guess what? My God, they only have about 4 years and 2 months left. But they are 45% there now. Using wind and biomass and ocean power, they're there. They're getting there. And they will be there. Smaller city, smaller town, and smaller community than Milan and other parts of the world, but it's a leadership role that they're providing for other communities throughout the world. I won't go through this, but as I said, this will all be available later. But what I tried to do was outline all these basic issues of what a green industrial revolution is. It's a very important, dramatic paradigm change. And when you think of what Steve Jobs did in terms of technology and information technology and computers, think about the green industrial revolution, renewable energy, and what we can do with waste and water and energy systems, you can begin to see how this all happened in the last decade. And now, what's the opportunity? It's up to all of us here, the students, the faculty, the community, to continue with that and actually change our economics for the next 100 years. I bring up one example from Germany. I think many of you are familiar with the feed-in tariff in Germany. You have those now here in Italy. I see a few people smiling. But what it did do for the Germans was create a lot of jobs and a lot of companies and a lot of businesses. And that's the kind of thing that we'll see happen. But I also believe we're going to see different kinds of financing mechanisms for renewable energy. The feed-in tariff is not the only example, the only way to do it, but it does provide jobs and businesses. I use this example just to show what it means. This is using efficiency for lighting, for conserving our energy, but also for generating power. You can see the example on the far right. This is actually a winery in Northern California. And they're generating power by covering different areas of the winery, for the winery itself. Sustainable communities are also involved with capital equity and financing. Again, I won't go through all the details of this, but there are various kinds of steps of how we look at it. It's not just a linear process, but it is one that involves very much a parallel thinking and combination of resources. This just shows how Google, for example, reports on how new clean energy is going to cost trillions, but in fact, there's a lot of money to be made. This is the kind of analysis that they're doing because they're looking at the future of the green industrial revolution. Science parks. We just heard a bit about this from the mayor and from the rector. These are concepts that I think many of you here in Europe are familiar with. We in America don't have science parks. The Chinese have them by the dozens. Science parks are where you take great ideas from all of you sitting out there, you walk across the street and you start a business. But it's more than an incubator because that business is helped financed by other businesses, by the local community, and also by the university and the city government. One of the things I wanted to point out is the United States has a technology that was developed about in the mid-1990s. It was a technology that was sold to a company in Japan called Toyota, and that's because GM, Ford, and Chrysler turned it down. Have you ever heard of a technology called regenerative braking? You put your foot on the brake, it causes, if you will, friction, creating electricity, stored in a battery. It turns into a hybrid car called a Prius. When I give this talk in America, I usually ask my entire audience to stand up and take a bow. Because we, the American taxpayers, paid for that technology almost 2 decades ago. But who's the #1 car company in the world today? Toyota, because they're making a fortune out of using this technology. But it's also available for trains and other kind of mass transit systems. We have the intellectual capital to do this, and that's what we have to think about, how to be innovative. This is an example of hydrogen fuel cell cars. This is actually a company in also Japan called Honda. And they actually have hydrogen fuel cell cars. You have them here in Europe as well with refueling stations. And this is refueling that's using solar. In other words, electrolyzing versus using some other natural gas or other source. I point this out to you because here is under the hood of this car. That's a fuel cell. I am at a polytechnical university, and I know that a lot of people in here are trained or teaching in engineering. Have any of you noticed how engineering has shifted from mechanical engineering to electrical and chemical engineering? Yes. That's because there's no longer a combustion engine here. Here, I'll do it for you folks sitting there. This is now a fuel cell. It's an electric system, electrical engineering system. This shows also how the sustainable communities have to be interactive in their infrastructures, how you need to have walking and bike paths. Again, something that my wife and I noticed here. We have lots of people riding bicycles. Even yesterday was a day with no cars. I wish we had that in America. But in America, we don't have bike paths in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is very widespread. There are 2 bike paths that I know of in all of Los Angeles. One is by the ocean. You know, what's going on? There's a lot going on throughout the world, and that's where we have to learn from one another. This just shows a campus that I worked in the United States, a college campus. These red areas are where solar panels are installed, and they're covering garages. So when you do have in America people driving to a college campus, they have to park the car. Well, if you have solar panels covering the car, it's generating power, but it's also keeping the car cool. I'll never forget the university president saying to me one time, these students love this system because they come to their car after school at 4 or 5 in the afternoon and it's nice and cool. It's not very hot from the sun. Think of that for shopping malls or shopping areas where you have to park cars. This is now a company I think some of you may have heard of before, Google. Okay, that was my American joke. You all know who Google, the company in Silicon Valley. They have all of their parking areas here, plus their buildings. Every single one of them here is covered with solar panels. And up here are electric cars where they get them recharged from these solar systems during the day when people are at work. So again, these are the kinds of things that can work and be combining of different technologies. These are just some other technologies, and I won't go through all the details on geothermal and solar thermal. This is a community in China where they're doing this in a very aggressive way in terms of looking at communities and developing and sustainable. This just shows some of the technologies I've already mentioned before, which I know some of you are familiar with. Of course, I mentioned this, the hydrogen fuel cell car, solar panels over parking areas, and of course also in your own home. It'd be nice to see wind turbines on top of homes, wouldn't it? I think some of you have been to Denmark and Norway and northern Germany, and you've seen that. We don't have that in America, where you have wind turbines next to a home or a building. This is what the Japanese think the future will be. The new highways are going to have all electric charging systems for cars to go. You'll see wind turbines right next to the highways. These are all solar panels here, and you'll be able to be using hands-free. Here's somebody just reading a paper and having her coffee. Why do you have to steer? Everything will be taken care of electronically. So finally, I want to end this talk by having a picture of my son. He's now going to be turning 4. This is the two of us about 2 years ago. But here he is with my grandson, an 8-month-old. And my 4-year-old is teaching the 8-month-old new technology and how to play with a toy. That's what we have to do. We have to learn from our younger generation, and we, the people who are older with children and grandchildren, have to do something about this because their lives are at risk. If we don't do something about our environment and make our communities sustainable today, they're not going to live for the future. And if they do, they'll be sick and sick and sicker. Thank you very much for your time today.